Welcome to Tripod, our travel retail themed podcast series in collaboration with the SEVA Group. I'm Martin Moodie.
I'm Roger Jackson.
Nice to be back with you, Roger, for our second episode. Tell us about what's going to be happening today.
Thanks, Martin. I think we've had some really good feedback from last week. I can definitely get better. I definitely got some messages and WhatsApps saying that I need to do a lot better. So I'm sure we can make this podcast more successful as we go along. But generally, I think we got some really good feedback. We've got a great guest today. Really excited, actually. We've got Sharon Beecham, President of Purchasing of Dubai Duty Free, one of our biggest female leaders in travel retail. And it'll be good, and a fascinating career, actually, even more fascinating than I even knew about before we started talking to Sharon for this. So can't wait to have Sharon on later. And then topic of the week. So the thing I want to talk about first is Hainan. I think you can't read any of our industry press at the moment without the H word popping up. And I thought it'd be really good just to start there, actually, Martin, and talk a bit about Hainan. Hainan's doing really incredibly well. And I think, if we look at 2020, even 2021, without Hainan in the picture, I think it would have been quite a negative news story. It's the shining gold light we've got at the moment in travel retail. And I think the reason I picked it as something to talk about this week, Martin, was just to explain a bit about duty-free islands. Not a new concept, been around, way before I was born, but, examples of Heligoland. Have a look up that up on Wikipedia for anyone who doesn't know what Heligoland is. A little island, off Germany, been a duty-free island since the 1950s. There's a few of these scattered in Scandinavia, just off Sweden. And generally speaking, for those who aren't aware of the concept, is there are islands that you can either go across by car, if possible, or ferry or boat, and you get duty-free status, whether that's when you're in the EU or in China when we're talking about Hainan. So not a new concept. Fantastic, it's been successful. I think there should always be a bit of caution with duty-free islands. And the only reason I say that is from a brand owner perspective. And as you know, I've spent 90% of my career over on the brand side, is just be really clear who your consumer is and where they're consuming the goods. And then is there a benefit? So, as long as the consumer's coming over, you know who they are, where they're taking the goods or where they're consuming the goods. And then most importantly, is there a benefit for your business? And the only reason I had that little caution on the end, Martin, with all of the duty-free islands is you don't want to cause, that disruption in your own business where you do start stealing from domestic, because we want a really healthy travel retail industry. And it's really important. That's a very transparent, industry, and one that is sustainable. But apart from that, I think they're a great concept. I think we'll see far more of these. I know there's a number planned for China, and I think we're going to see a number of these pop up, and I'm sure we'll see them throughout the rest of the world as well, especially as we start seeing the rebuild post-COVID. So, Martin, what's your view? You've been to Hainan, I haven't. What's your view, and how amazing does it look over there?
Yeah, it is amazing. Remember, it's only been going since 2011, so this is a fledgling industry. It took the model from Jeju in Korea and Okinawa in Japan. It's built up from a single tiny store in downtown Sanya run by CDFG in 2011 to what it is today. Which is basically a $5 billion market last year.
Wow.
Going to be around $9 billion this year,
wow.
15 billion next year, and a lot more in the near future. So it's an extraordinary success story. But you're right to touch on some sensitivities. There are growing pains, as there are with any market that just grows that fast. And I think my wariness at the moment would be looking at this proliferation of retailers that you've got there, which reminds me a little bit about what happened in downtown Seoul, where frankly too many operators came in, and we had a lot of discounting and a lot of, shall we say, less disciplined retailing. And I think the key for those new retailers is differentiation from one another. Don't get in a price war and a race to the bottom, because that will hurt Hainan, and it will also hurt a brand, the brand attitude towards the island. Because you're right, there is some tension between the Chinese domestic market arms and the travel retail arms, because this is, at the end of the day, a domestic consumer. So Hainan's just got to be a little careful, but if they get it right, because of the Chinese government's determination, even obsession, I would say, with maximizing domestic consumption and repatriating travel spending from abroad, then Hainan's got a glorious future. Just has to make sure that it stays disciplined, and I think it'll be in good shape. But it's an extraordinary success story of our times, Roger. We call it the lighthouse of the duty-free industry. Certainly the rest of the industry was in a lot of darkness last year and still is. So, well, let's see. Will we see other Hainans around the world, around Asia, to match the Jeju, the Okinawa, and the Hainan model? Why not? It's going to be interesting to watch. So, Roger, I think it's time to bring in our special guest. So this episode's special guest is someone known and much respected across the whole duty-free industry. Sharon Beecham is head of purchasing at Dubai Duty Free, one of the world's great travel retailers, with a fantastic 38-year success story. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, gentlemen. How are you?
Nice to have you with us. Roger, we're delighted at this week's guest, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Really can't wait to get into it with Sharon. It'll be really good. We're very lucky to have someone like Sharon on the podcast. So thanks a lot for agreeing to do it, Sharon.
Oh, you're very kind. Very nice intro, Martin. Thanks very much. I think it's the kindest thing you've said about me for a few years. Thank you.
Now, Roger, you're based in Dubai, of course, where Sharon is. So why don't you lead us in, and we'll take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Sharon, I guess the first thing I want to ask you, considering you and I stumbled into each other about 3 years ago in Moscow, take us back to when you used to work in Russia, which is a fascinating story, which you have shared with me in the past. But I'd love to hear about your time in Russia in duty free and living in Russia as well, which I guess most people won't know that about you, actually.
Yeah, sure. I actually got to Moscow in 1994. I started in February 1994, which seems like an absolute lifetime ago now. I stumbled into Moscow just because I was a bit kind of bored doing what I was doing, to be perfectly honest, at the time. And I just told the agency to, just anything, off the wall, whatever. And then they kind of came up with Moscow, which I nearly kind of fell off the chair. I didn't even know that anybody could be employed in Moscow at that point in time. And that's where they introduced me to ARI. ARI interviewed me. They were looking for a retail manager for Aerofirst in Moscow. And I got through the interview and they offered me a job. And then the next thing I knew, I was on a plane and on the way there. I can remember being at the airport and absolutely sobbing because I was leaving all my friends behind. And it felt like I was going to the other side of the world. It was 3 hours away. The places to live were not of a lot of choice. So we ended up, first of all, they put us into what was the Olympic Village at the time, which was miles out of the city. So if you wanted to go into the city, it was like a 45-minute taxi drive to get in there. You didn't pick up a phone and call a taxi. If you wanted a taxi, you just stood on the side of the road and stuck your thumb out, and anybody would stop and you'd just negotiate a bit of money and get in there. If you say that now, thinking that I was a 29-year-old girl at the time, if you said that to anybody of that age now, you think they're absolutely bonkers. To get in a car with a stranger on your own, you'd never seen before, for a 45-minute drive into Moscow. And we never once questioned it. I remember being kind of shocked and felt quite sorry at the same time for there'd be all these women lined up outside the metros selling everything from great big buckets of coleslaw that they would make themselves and sell, and then they'd give it to you in a plastic cup. or absolutely everything and anything that they had spare. I remember seeing bras, knickers, tights, t-shirts, things, everything that you can imagine. And my friend came over. I remember she couldn't get her head around the fact that this old lady was standing outside the metro with her trying to sell a bra. So yeah, shopping, living was interesting, but it was incredibly historic place at the end of the day. And as much as Moscow was a little bit kind of run down and a bit kind of tatty on the edges, it was still beautifully historic. And it was really untouched at that point in time. It had not the big shopping, I'm not sure what it's called, but they were building that big shopping arcade in front of Red Square. That wasn't there when I was there. So it was still fairly untouched to a certain extent.
You're most known for working Dubai duty free, I guess, in the industry. How did that come about? And I guess from Russia to Dubai, 3 hours, 7.5 hours. And I guess Dubai, when you got here, was very different to the Dubai that we enjoy now. How did that happen, and what did you think when you got there?
Well, as much as obviously I knew Aer Rianta and all of the people, I didn't know that there was a connection with Dubai and Aer Rianta. I knew the connection in Bahrain with the Middle East office because some of the people that I worked with had gone to Bahrain to work in Aer Rianta Middle East. So I had gone over to Dubai to visit a friend that was in Dubai. That was nothing to do with the duty free. They were a friend from the UK. I had finished my contract with Aer first, and I was had taken a year out, and I'd gone traveling. Because I finished my contract with Aer Rianta in China. I did 3 months in Beijing. So I actually stayed on and went to Vietnam and Malaysia and all of these places. So before I was going to go back to the UK and think seriously about what I was going to do, I actually went back to the UK, dropped all my stuff, went to visit this friend that was living in Dubai. And while I was there, the people who I knew in Bahrain from Aer Rianta Middle East actually contacted me to say that Dubai Duty Free were looking to kind of expand the management team, if you like. And somebody had told them that I was there. And because there was with Aer Rianta and the Irish connection, they actually asked me to go in and meet them. So I went in and met George, and the rest is history. So George interviewed me, he offered me a job, and I started in February 1998. I think it was particularly appealing to me that it was travel retail, and I would have, if I'd gone back to the UK, I would have started looking in that area still, because the difference between the domestic retailing and travel retailing is just, it's so much more interesting and dynamic, and it's a lot more that you can embrace in terms of being able to influence and the size of the business in comparison to a domestic unit. So if you're part of high street retailing in the UK, you're ultimately going to be looking after one shop. Getting into regional work or head office work is a huge step up, and it's extremely competitive. So you go into airports and travel retail, you're immediately already in a big size in terms of the responsibility. So I'd really enjoyed that part of it in Moscow, the size of the business and the variety of it, and how dynamic it was. And I would have liked to have stayed in that. So it was appealing to me when Dubai reached out to go and see them. When I joined in February 98, within a year, the work had already started to close that and move it into the new airport. So it was kind of like a 3-phase. So it was almost like a baptism of fire from the moment that I joined. Within a few months, they were cutting the shop in half, moving it to somewhere else. So we almost spent like nearly 18 months, probably not quite close to 2 years, with Brendan O'Shea at the time, just constantly moving things and opening new sections to allow for the work to actually, for us to actually open the main shop, which was in 2000. So yeah, it was a baptism of fire for sure.
Well, so you've worked for 2 players over these last decades that have this commonality of heritage, and that's the Irishness and the Aer Rianta base. I guess their values and their way of doing things, and of course Dubai duty free Free's way of doing things. I suppose that's had a pretty big influence on how you see retail, Sharon.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, like you said, the biggest part of my career has now been with Dubai Duty Free. So, you know, there's something that the Irish culture and the Irish way of doing things does bring to a business. You just can't deny it. In terms of, you know, having like a family feel to it. You know, very strong ethics and morals in terms of how you treat people, and that without that kind of, you know, value in the staff and the people, then the work's just not going to be able to get done. And it all starts with the work and the people first. And in fact, Colm has repeated quite a few times in interviews I've heard him since the pandemic has been on, that, you know, that a company has an obligation to its people to do the right thing by them. When things are bad as well as when things are good, and that just has run throughout the whole of the company since I've known them.
Sharon, you mentioned some famous names in our industry already, so just tell us through those two stints, long stint with Dubai Duty Free and before that with ARI, key influences on your career.
I'd say there's been a few actually. I mean, if I go back to the very beginning in my, because there's one thing that Colm and I have in common, other than working for Dubai Duty Free, and that's that both of us started our careers in Woolworths. So, you know, Colm doesn't, you know, makes it very well known that he actually started in Woolies sweeping the floor. Now, to be fair, I did not start sweeping the floor in Woolies. I was taken onto their management training program, way back in '86, I suppose. And I started on their management training program. So that really and truthfully is what would have set me on my whole retail career. And to be fair to them, that program that I was on has actually probably kept me in good stead for many of the work that I've done. It actually, when I started, there was hardly any women on the management training program or in any of the shops. It was that time when, you know, I suppose women professionals were starting to break out into many parts of the industry. So they actually put me with one of the very few female managers at the time. And I think if it wasn't for her, she really showed me that, you know, regardless of being 21 and female and knowing nothing, that it didn't matter whether you're male or female, that you could make it if you were competent. That in the days of some of these big retailers, the manager was like God. You know, he sat up in his office and his big, massive desk. He would have an ashtray on the desk. He would have sat there most of the day puffing away, and he was God. And you know, he was very difficult to relate to or have any time spent with. So I went from her to one of these godlike managers who hardly interacted with us at all. And I was with another trainee who was a guy at the time, and I was practically invisible in the room whenever we did interact with him. So I think that would have completely killed me in terms of both confidence and being able to carry on if I'd started with him first. So I always remember Anita Brown for having set me on the way. And then I was very lucky, again, as we went through a few years with Woolies, to meet some people that were more like her than like him. And then by the time I got to Moscow and spent some time with the guys in Moscow, my general manager, who I finished with, was a gentleman called John Meskel. I'm not sure whether you would have known. Yeah, you know John. John was the first general manager that I came across who was a finance guy. So most of the people I'd worked with were just retail through and through. You know, you cut them down the middle and they were just retailers. So John was the first person that I worked with who came from the finance background, and he really, I learned quite a few things from him actually in terms of that financial aspect of the business. He was very black and white in terms of how he did things, but I learned quite a few things from John. And then by the time I got to Dubai, it was Brendan, George, Colm, and of course Colm's just been phenomenal in terms of his support for everybody who he works with. He's a big support for promoting people through the organization, which, perfectly honest, I was able to take advantage of, you know, and in that respect, I would not be where I'm sitting today, if it hadn't been for Colm and the confidence that he had in me and the support he gave me to offer me this position. So most definitely.
I was a bit worried earlier, Sharon, when you mentioned commonality with Colm's earlier career, because of course Colm wanted to be a dentist at one stage. That was what he was planning to be. And I would not want to be sitting in a dentist chair with Colm McLoughlin as my dentist, because he moves so fast and he's at it all the time, isn't he? And I think he found his right calling, as you did, obviously.
One of the questions I asked you, it feels like you've had some really good stakeholders in your career where actually equality hasn't got in the way. I know you, not only are you in one of the biggest jobs in our industry and a female leader, how do you find equality generally in travel retail? Because it sounds like in Dubai Duty Free, there's no problem there at all, and Colm's very supportive, and Ramesh, etc.
Personally, I very rarely found a problem in terms of it being a wall in front of me that I haven't been able to get over. I think it would be, I don't think anybody would believe me if I said that I hadn't occasionally come across, some, I'm not saying problems, but some quite obvious things that was to do with being a woman. It most definitely wasn't within Dubai Duty Free. It would have been more to do with some of the suppliers that we dealt with. I can tell you now that there is a lot of, I'm going to call them old timers, which doesn't sound very respectful, but some people who've been around a very long time from the supplier point of view that would have been used to working in a more male dominated arena, so that when it comes to them dealing with a female, when they haven't had to in that role, some of them haven't found it the easiest thing to do. We are different. I am different at the end of the day, and some of that is to do with being a woman. Some of that is to do with just who I am, and occasionally it's been a little bit difficult, I'll be honest. I do, I say this with the greatest respect to this person in the world, and I don't think he meant it at all to be disrespectful or insulting, but it just, I have to laugh about it now when I think back to it. When I went into purchasing, I was taken over from a gentleman called Michelle Poe. Now, Martin will remember him very well. You won't know him, Roger, because he's been retired a long time. So I went to work with Michelle for about 3 months before he left. So Michelle spent, obviously a lot of time bringing me to meetings and introducing me to people. And there was one guy, I'm not even going to tell you who he was. He still works in the industry. And he just, Michelle introduced me as, this is Sharon, she's going to be taking over when I go, and blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he didn't even take a breath. And he said, well, I always knew Dubai Duty Free was a forward-thinking organisation, and now I know it from putting a woman in charge.
I've got one last question before we go on to sort of the end part, more of a personal one, actually. So we both worked at Kingfisher and Superdrug by the sounds of it. We bumped into each other in Moscow. So a couple of years ago, I sent you a Facebook friend request. Sharon, I've had nothing back from you. I thought I'd use this platform as a way of finding out what's going on.
Jesus Christ, I thought you were one of your boyfriends stalking me. So.
Sharon, we've decided to transport you, as we do all our tripod guests in this series, to a desert island. We know how hard you work, so we're going to give you a break from the day job for a while. We're going to make your life a little more pleasurable. You can take a few things along.
So Sharon, you've just arrived on the island. You're allowed one bit of tech. What would you bring on the island?
I guess it would have to be the laptop, Roger. I mean, at the end of the day, my whole life is on this laptop, whether it be work, whether it be personal, no matter what. It would have to be the laptop. I actually don't use a lot of anything else. I mean, even the phone, it's still just a function for me. I mean, I think that just shows my age. I make calls on it, send messages on it. And if I wanted to actually surf something and find something on the web, I would still use the laptop. This drives me bonkers trying to see on this. So yeah, laptop.
And now the contentious question, what would you buy from Duty Free on the way? What one item would you buy from Duty Free?
Well, I got to tell you, the only item that I do constantly buy when I'm flying is more books. But both me and Colm, which is the other thing we have in common, are always kind of looking, where's the books? Where's the book space? How much space are we going to the books?
I'm going to push you for one other item, Sharon, because you've been a champion of the wine category. You've done a great job, as Michelle Poe did indeed before you, and you've really built that category fantastically. So I'm going to let you have a bottle of wine from any country, old world, new world, wherever, to take on the island. What would it be?
I think, and I don't know, maybe this is something about me as well. It's going to be the one that I can't get my hands on at the moment. When Michelle and I went to Australia to pick the first Australian wines in Dubai Duty Free's wine category, which was God knows how many years ago. We spent nearly 3 weeks there drinking God knows how many wines. And one of the wines that we found was in the Hunter Valley called Capicale. And it was actually a Scottish gentleman that had moved to Australia many moons before and opened up his winery and named it Capicale. And even to this day, it is still the best bottle of Shiraz I've ever tasted. And we used to sell tons of it. And then they got bought out by somebody, and it's just been almost bloody impossible to get hold of them again.
Sharon, thank you so much for joining us and giving up us 30 minutes of your precious time. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thank you for sharing everything about your amazing career. And we really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for everything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for not grilling me.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sharon. Take good care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Martin, that was great to hear from Sharon. Some of those stories of her time in Russia, China, and obviously the Middle East. She really has had a fascinating career. And it was great to hear her in this forum talk so openly about all of that. What do you think?
She's a great character too, isn't she? So she's been part of 2 brilliant success stories, pioneering stories. She's remained humble in herself and a lot of fun, as you saw on that interview.
The one thing though, Martin, she does need to do, she needs to accept my Facebook friend request. So I'm going to be getting on my phone straight after this, and I'll be adding her again, and I'll let you know next week if I get a positive response.
Well, we'll see what happens, Roger. I wouldn't be too hopeful, having been ghosted once. I just feel it might just happen again, and I think that's because she discovered you were a Lionel Richie fan, but that's my theory anyway. Roger, great being with you. Have a good week, and let's hope the business continues to show more green shoots of recovery around the world.
See you next week.
See you next week.